Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Hello everyone, my name is Raul Rosiga. I'm a senior here at Syracuse University studying health and exercise science on the pre-physical therapy track. Today, I have the distinct pleasure of having Dr. Mike Haynie with me. His department is under the Strategic Initiative and Innovation here at Syracuse University. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming on. You have quite a background from being at 60 Minutes, meeting presidents, have your own TED Talk. It's an honor having you here today.
Thanks.
So I'll start off with, what was your job in the military?
So I had a few different jobs in the military. My core job was a logistician. So I did acquisition and contracting and logistics for the Air Force. But I also had several, like many folks in the military do, several other duties along the way. So I worked for a couple of years as it's called the aide de camp to an Air Force 4-star general. So I did that for 2 years. And then I also had the good fortune of being picked up to go teach at the U.S. Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs. So I did 2 different assignments as an instructor at the Air Force Academy.
Wow. What was your favorite duty station?
The Air Force Academy, no doubt. No doubt. As a matter of fact, that's why I'm here. I really fell in love with teaching and being around students as a consequence of my time at the Air Force Academy. And that was actually what motivated me to get out of the Air Force. My time as an instructor at the academy was coming to an end, and I really did not want to walk away from higher education. So I decided to get out of the Air Force at that point, and that's what brought me to Syracuse University.
Well, that's fantastic. You found what you wanted to do post-military while you're in?
Yeah, I did. I did, yeah.
So what made you during that time in the military realize how much you love teaching?
It was unexpected. I had the opportunity, part of the assignment teaching at the Air Force Academy was prior to that assignment, the Air Force sent me to school to earn my PhD. So while I was an active duty Air Force officer, I was assigned to the University of Colorado at Boulder to earn my PhD in business strategy and entrepreneurship. Candidly, I saw the assignment teaching as an opportunity to go to school, to get a PhD. I didn't necessarily see myself spending the rest of my life as a teacher, as a professor. But then after I completed the PhD and got to the Air Force Academy, I just fell in love with teaching. So it wasn't a purposeful decision on my part, recognizing that I wanted to go be a professor to take that assignment. It was more as a means to get to graduate school. And my intention was to do my time teaching at the Air Force Academy and then just go back to my core Air Force job, because at that point I had been in the military for 14 years. So typically folks retire at 20 years. But the reality is I really fell in love with being around students and mentoring students and teaching. And, but the challenge for me was I still had 6 years left before I hit 20 in the military. But the reality is I couldn't imagine at that point doing anything else in my life. So even though I was, almost to 20 years, I decided to walk away at 14 just because the idea of treading water for 6 more years to get to 20, doing something that I didn't love as much as I love teaching, I just couldn't bring myself to do that. So I made the hard choice of getting out at 14 years.
That's a very tough choice. It's like you're so close to retirement and getting that pension every month.
Yeah, it was. But again, I've never been somebody sort of motivated by money or those kinds of rewards. And I found something that I was passionate about, getting up every day and going to work when I was at the Air Force Academy. So here I am.
I'm glad you alluded to money. The next question is, how important of a factor should money play when a veteran plans his life post-military?
Yeah, so it's a good question, and it's one that's hard for someone not in that veteran's shoes to answer. I'll start off by that start off with that because the reality is everybody that leaves the military is in a different situation as it relates to family, as it relates to all kinds of other concerns and responsibilities that they may have. So I don't want to sit here and say, for example, money shouldn't be important, because the reality is I've not walked in your shoes. I'm not in your particular situation. And for some at that point of transition, it might matter a lot, because they might have debt, or they might have, again, maybe they're just starting a family, and, the responsible thing is to care about those issues. That said, I am also somebody who I have always thought about the choices I make in terms of my professional life as a function of, my passions and what gets me excited. And because I'm convinced that if you, whatever vocation you choose, if you are passionate about it, you're going to do it well. And if you're going to do it well, over time, the financial piece will take care of itself. Those rewards will come.
Wow, that's great. Yeah, everybody is a little different, so it's kind of hard. In the previous podcast, me and another student were trying to dictate how much money should you have saved when you get out. It is kind of difficult based on the situation.
It is, because I think I'm a big believer in empathy, and which is the idea of acknowledging that you've not walked in somebody else's shoes. And so I bristle a little bit when people get very sort of objective with regard to what other people should be doing in their lives and what should matter to them. So I think it's one thing to generally suggest some advice or best practices, but you're not going to find me being somebody who's going to be very directive with you or anybody else in terms of what you should be doing with your life.
Okay. Well, that's fantastic. Post-military, did you come straight to Syracuse to teach?
I did. When you say straight to Syracuse, on a Thursday in August of 2006, I was still wearing a uniform in Colorado, and on a Tuesday, on a Thursday of that same week was my first faculty meeting as a civilian professor at Syracuse University. And I have to say, after that faculty meeting, I thought I made the biggest mistake of my life, because, here I thought, I'm going to get to, I'm going to meet my new colleagues, and we're going to talk about the mission and everything that we have to get done this year. And that first faculty meeting devolved into an argument among, I sat quietly in the back of the room, but an argument among other faculty members about how to develop a point system to determine who was going to get the larger offices in the business school. So it was not exactly an inspiring start for me, but got much better from there.
You had less than a week to transition into civilian life. That's tough.
Yeah.
The veterans take a whole year off before they start school sometimes.
Yeah. For me, it was, I had some obligations at the Air Force Academy that I committed to. So, over the summer at the service academies, the students at a military academy are not like a typical college student, in that even over the summer, they're engaged in all kinds of training programs, and I had committed to be involved in some of those. So I wanted to keep that commitment. So I made my transition. Those programs ended at the end of July. So that's when I stepped away and started moving east to Syracuse.
Are you originally from New York?
I'm not. No, I grew up in Philadelphia.
That's right. You're an Eagles fan, unfortunately.
I am an Eagles fan, yes. Grew up in Philadelphia, and then, the Air Force, in my 14 years, I PCSed 9 times in 14 years, so I was all over the country in those 14 years.
Wow. Quite a bit.
I did, yeah.
Oh. So you got Syracuse University, you're a hotshot professor, really killing it. When did you decide to operate the IVMF?
Well, so the reality is the story is a little different than you just set up, in that I wasn't super happy when I got here. I think I made a mistake in understanding maybe what I was getting into. I assumed that the things I loved about teaching at the Air Force Academy would translate directly to Syracuse University. And it turns out, and this isn't a commentary on Syracuse University, it turns out that the experience at a military academy, that for both students and for faculty, is different than at a civilian university. And I realized what I loved at the Air Force Academy was being able to mentor students and be engaged with them outside the classroom as well as inside the classroom. And it's a little different here. And I was sort of grieving for that larger sense of purpose and connectedness and that's when I got the idea. And at that point, importantly, all I'd known in my adult life was the military and that community. So that's when I got the idea, well before the idea to start the IVMF, was to start a small program in the Whitman School of Management, in the business school here, around veterans and entrepreneurship. I had been doing some work with a PhD student who was studying immigrant entrepreneurship. Why is it that people that immigrate to the United States start small businesses at a much higher rate than others? And I was unfamiliar with that academic literature, so I was doing some study on my own so I could support this PhD student. And I came across a parallel literature on people with disabilities. And it turns out people with disabilities actually start small businesses at a rate about 7 times higher than others in this country. And if you think about it for a second, it's sort of intuitive. They can leverage entrepreneurship, business ownership as a way to craft a vocation in the face of what might be barriers to traditional employment because of a disability. So for me, that was a little light bulb moment, because I was very aware that about 30% of people getting out of the military in our, as a consequence of our post 9/11 wars, were leaving with disabilities. So I went to the dean of the business school at the time, a guy named Mel Stith, and Mel himself was a Vietnam era Army veteran. And I said to him, hey, let me start this program where we bring, injured service members, veterans to the university over the summer and put them through a program to help them launch and grow small businesses. We called it the Entrepreneurship Boot Camp for Veterans with Disabilities. And I thought I was going to have to sell him on this thing. And 3 minutes into our conversation, he's sketching out how we do this, and he got very excited. So we launched that program and delivered the first one in the summer of 2007. And we had no aspiration. It was just going to be something that was going to be meaningful to me. I didn't have a plan to do anything bigger, but we were surprised that other universities came to us and said, hey, can we do this too? So the next year we expanded that program to UCLA and Texas A&M and Florida State. And then the next year, LSU and University of Missouri. But all of that came before the IVMF, before the Daniela Institute for Veterans and Military Families. But what we realized doing this first program was that there was a big gap in higher education with regard to how higher ed as a community is sort of meaningfully engaged in the social, economic, wellness issues impacting vets and their families. So that was the genesis of, another pitch, which was, why don't we create an institute at Syracuse University focused on the military-connected community, veterans, military family members. So that was then in 2011 that we launched the institute. But really, the work got started in 2007.
So your first phase of making Syracuse University the best place for vets was successful, so successful after 1 year, other schools started reaching out to you.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
I think they saw a way, like we did, to have impact. We tend to think in higher education about what we do as a function of degrees, of putting students through programs that, ultimately result in a degree. But the reality is there's all this intellectual capital on this campus that can be leveraged in ways other than contributing towards degree programs. And this was an instance. That first program we we built it in a way where it started online for about 45 days, and then we brought a group of 20 veterans to the campus for sort of an 8-day immersion, a boot camp. That's why we called it, use the military term. They went from about 7:30 in the morning till 10 o'clock at night for 8 days. And then we put them into a post-program support network for the next year to help them get a business off the ground. And, what we realized was, we can, and all the people who taught in it were SU professors. But different than a degree program, they would come in and teach a module on this or a module on that. And it was super impactful. And, I think a lot of other institutions looking for a way to engage in this community, saw that and said, we can do that too. So that's how it worked. Yeah.
Was this happen before or after Boots to Business?
Oh, this was the first thing. So Boots to Business, which is our, now the federal government's transition pathway to business ownership out of the military, that's managed by the U.S. Small Business Administration. It was the EBV program here was the impetus for Boots to Business. So the SBA came to us and said, you've developed this competency around veterans and business ownership. Can you help us create a formal transition program for service members out of the military that we operate on military installations to help them become? So we wrote the original curriculum and the model and all of that, and essentially gifted it to the federal government.
How does that make you feel that something you create, like your baby, is now getting taught to every transitioning service member?
It feels great. The reality is, I think it's not quite what it was when we proposed it. I'm trying to choose my words a little carefully, but at the end of the day, there's always this tension in government about resources, and I think what we originally built and proposed and was implemented, all the way back in 2000, 2008, 2009, 2010. Today it's a very different program. I would argue it's probably not quite as robust as it was then. All that said, to get up until that point, for 50 years, there was no formal business ownership transition out of the military. So in that regard, it's a great thing.
So your name and face, Dr. Michael Haynie, associated with pretty much every military program on campus. But you did not single-handedly create these programs, right?
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, the reality is, we have a great team, both at the IVMF, at the Institute, but then also at the Office of Veteran and Military Affairs. One of the things, if I'm being entirely candid, when I got here in 2006, Syracuse University maybe was not the most welcoming place for military-connected students. I felt that as a faculty member. There was when Ken Severud arrived as chancellor in 2014. For those of us doing this work, the world changed a little bit because Chancellor Severud, is a student of history, and he understood that Syracuse University, as we know it today, really came about as a function of decisions that Chancellor William Tully made at Syracuse in the 1940s, when he saw an opportunity to take what at the time was a regional college and grow it to a nationally relevant academic institution by welcoming tens of thousands of returning World War II vets to Syracuse University. And Chancellor Severud saw an opportunity for history to repeat itself, if you will, and do that again with the post 9/11 generation of veterans. So he made a commitment in 2014 to really set Syracuse University apart as an exemplar for others in higher ed, and to be the university that is welcoming in every way that word means to military connected students. And that was really the impetus for creating the Office of Veteran and Military Affairs that supports our military connected students on campus, and expanding a lot of the work we do outside the silos of the Institute or the OVMA to all of our schools and colleges at Syracuse.
When I was doing my application letter for Syracuse University, I transferred from my community college. I did a lot of research on Syracuse. I really wanted to get into school.
Mm-hmm.
I found it so astonishing how just in the 40s, Chancellor Tolley was just spearheading this idea. Like, Syracuse University had a helping hand in creating the first GI Bill.
Yeah. It is pretty remarkable. I mean, Chancellor Tolley happened to have a personal relationship with President Roosevelt. And, President Roosevelt, when the end of World War II was in sight, turned his attention to, how do we successfully support and transition what would be about 12.5 million Americans returning now as veterans from World War II. And Roosevelt asked Chancellor Tolley to be part of this group that he put together to figure out that question. And it was from that group that the original GI Bill was conceived. And, Tolley came back here and he wrote a one-page letter that I know you've seen. And he invited, in the face of the GI Bill, he invited any returning World War II veteran that wanted to earn a college degree, even if you hadn't finished high school, to enroll at Syracuse University. And we went from a school in 1944 of maybe 4,100 students to within just a few years, close to 18,000 students. And that entire delta were returning World War II veterans. And, and they had the effect that Chancellor Tolley envisioned. They transformed the institution in some pretty fundamental ways and set the conditions for SU to exist as we know it today.
Yeah, that's part of the reason I have so much respect for Chancellor Severu. Like, having veterans in the classroom is like very impactful at the end of the classroom.
Oh yeah. I mean, and not just in the classroom, but in student government, on our clubs, our club sports, our athletic teams. I think if you look at diversity in all of its forms, one metric or measure of diversity is diversity of life experience. And I think if you put, and all that diversity in an academic environment makes us better. And if you put your example, you put a student veteran in a political science class who, with 18, 19-year-olds whose experience is very different than that of someone who may be deployed to the Middle East and to Europe or South America, wherever it is, it brings a different dynamic to a classroom that makes everybody better at the end of the day.
So, Dr. Haynie, when you were, you're well in now, Syracuse, you bought into the culture, how did you envision the dynamics of veteran resources?
So, as I said earlier, I think the more work I started doing in this space, the more disillusioned I was with how higher education as a community broadly was really not meaningfully engaged in this community. And, so the idea came of, well, why don't we play a leadership role here? And, in higher education, we love to start institutes and centers for everything. And I was really surprised that there did not exist in higher education an academic institute or center focused on the social, economic, wellness concerns of veterans and their families. So I said, why not Syracuse? I put a proposal together, sort of a pitch deck, and took it to the leadership at the university at the time. So this was before Chancellor Severu was here. And, it was well received, but there was no
backing up.
There's no money. So the challenge for me was to go out and find the money to get this institute off the ground. And the university at the time had an existing relationship with JP Morgan Chase that had nothing to do with veterans. It was it was a partnership that we had with JP Morgan related to some cybersecurity programs that we were running. And but I leveraged that relationship to get a meeting. I got a 10-minute meeting with a gentleman named Frank Bisignano. Frank at the time was the global chief operating officer at JP Morgan. And my plan was to go pitch JP Morgan to fund the creation of this institute at Syracuse. So, I fly down to New York City and get in there, and I think I had put like 40 PowerPoint slides together to give
typical officer fashion.
Yeah, typical Air Force officer, right? Yeah. And I never had to take them out of my briefcase. I pitched him the general idea, and he said, "How much do you need?" And I said, "Well, I'd like $7.5 million." And we laughed, but he gave it to me.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So my only regret is I didn't ask for more. I should have asked for more. But JP Morgan wrote us an initial 5-year grant of $7.5 million to seed the creation of the IVMF, and that's how we got it off the ground.
Something that astonished me that I didn't really realize till I got here was like, truly how much money's in the world that if you have a good enough idea and you really want it, you could get the funding.
Yeah, it's a lot of it is just being able to get to people that have those kind of resources and want to make a difference.
How did it make you feel that, at one point you're an officer of the Air Force and then a couple years later you're in front of a big shot in the JP Morgan?
You know what? Honestly, I think I was so naive to all of this that it didn't, in a way that was good, because I didn't know that was a big deal, if you know what I mean. And therefore I wasn't, intimidated or, because I still interact with folks like that now a lot. I see how some folks are, in awe of people in positions, but the reality is they're just like the rest of us.
Yeah.
And you're better off remembering that in the context of your engagements with them. So, but it was, all that said, it was still, what was humbling about it was that he wanted to take a chance on the idea.
Wow. So you have had like a highlight reel career post-military. How has that differed from a career in the military, just like personal wise, dealing with people, yourself?
Yeah, I don't know that I call it a highlight reel career, but I've had some great opportunities, and but I had those same great opportunities in the military. I still miss my military service. Because of the people. I don't miss a lot of the
day-to-day grind.
Yeah. Okay. I was going to use a different, more colorful language, so that's better. What you said is better. I don't miss waking up and going to work and finding a little yellow slip of paper on my desk saying that I have to report for urinalysis this morning or something like that. But I do miss the people because what I found to be great about my military experience was this idea of a group of people working toward a common purpose every day, and I do miss, not that doesn't happen at Syracuse, but it is harder. And I think while I was in, I just had great opportunities. And the Air Force, my plan was to say I was able to go to college in the first place because of an ROTC scholarship. I don't come from a family that had lots of money, and I had a younger sister who also wanted to go to college, and I know that my family would have been a struggle to get both of us into college. So I figured this was a way to, just because I was older, it doesn't seem fair that that I would get what was saved up. So. But my plan was to only stay in for 5 years, pay back that scholarship. That's what I owed. And then I would get out. And I stayed in because the Air Force kept teeing up great experiences for me and great opportunities for me. And that's also what's happened at Syracuse.
Yeah.
I just do the work and whatever job you're asked to do the best at that job. And people will recognize it and give you give you opportunities to do new and different things.
Yeah, I feel the opportunities at this campus are endless. Whatever you want to do in life, I feel there's opportunity here. And like, there's student veterans on this campus that they created a club this year.
Yeah.
And it's just anything you want to do is possible. And I was just go back to what you said, like the Air Force paid for your college. Not only paid for your undergrad, it paid all the way for your PhD, which is astonishing.
Well, they also in the middle paid for a master's degree too. So before I went for my PhD, the Air Force also for 2 years sent me to the University of Oregon to earn my MBA. So that was before my PhD. So and that's what I tell. I talk to ROTC cadets, here at Syracuse about those kinds of opportunities that, the military values education, and they're, whether it's the Army, the Air Force, Navy, Marine Corps, there are all kinds of in-service opportunities while you're serving to pursue advanced education.
Yeah, like so I went in normal, got my GI Bill.
Yep.
I think one of the ripple effects of this fabulous building is that I learned about a program called VERNI, formerly known as Voc Rehab.
Yep.
And now I just got approved this semester, and that's going to pay all for my professional degree.
Yeah.
And
it's great.
It's fantastic. Like, I cannot ask for. Like, there was ups and downs in the military, but I'm going to get a lot of education for free.
Well, I think, and that's one of the great, if you look at what historians and sociologists, when they look back at the original GI Bill after World War II, it was, many will describe it as creating the middle class in America, because it afforded so many people the opportunity for education that otherwise wouldn't have been available to them, that it elevated an entire generation of families economically and socially in some pretty powerful ways.
Yeah, well, I learned this semester after World War II, it actually just created the suburbs.
Yeah, it did. Yeah,
all these veterans coming back, they had to make houses outside the city, and cars became important. And
absolutely.
A huge ripple effect of our military in America.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, so veterans come in, they say if they do one contract, they're early to mid 20s.
Yeah.
They do contracts, they're late 20s or 30s.
Yeah.
How important is it to hit benchmarks in your life by a certain age? Because we feel a rush, like I had to hurry up and catch on my age group.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a big believer, and only because I've sort of found that whether it's veterans or even traditional students, the ones who build this plan that say, okay, in a year I have to done this, and all with some objective at the end. Sometimes you get so blinded by the plan that you miss all these other opportunities. Literally, you don't see doors that open for you that maybe take you down a different road that could be a better road. I have over time become someone who is a little anti-life planning. I don't know a way to put it, only because I have found that just being open to saying yes to new opportunities that maybe weren't part of the plan has been very beneficial to me. And I realize, even the PhD thing, when the Air Force presented me with that opportunity, my initial answer was no. And I had at the time I was working for this Air Force 4-star general, and I saw myself. I had hit all those benchmarks that you're talking about, and I saw myself on a career fast track, and it was actually the senior enlisted advisor for this command, the Air Force Materiel Command, who pulled me aside and took me in a room and said, "What are you doing?" And this is the chief talk, and at this point I'm a captain, and he's saying, "You're crazy." He said, every once in a while in your military career, the Air Force will tee up for you. And he used the term a now and later. And I'm like, Chief, what are you talking about? I knew there was a candy called a now and later, I think. And he said, what I'm talking about is this is an opportunity now to make you a better officer, but it's also one that's going to set you up for later. Wow. And you never say no. His point was you never say no to a now and later. So he changed my mind. I said yes, and he was absolutely correct. That experience that the Air Force gave me made me more immediately maybe a better leader. It helped me to think differently about what I do in terms of my military job, but it entirely set me up for later. I'm in the later now, and it's because I said yes to that one opportunity that I was very quick to dismiss because it wasn't on the plan, right? And that's what I mean when I say, sometimes if you get too focused on the milestones and the plan and the bet, you're blind, or you will forego opportunities that you wouldn't even see coming.
Wow, that's fantastic advice. It's I might have topped yours to show up. That was a good advice. So you show up. Yeah, that's what made me say yes to my internships over the summer. I did two simultaneously. So I had to wake up at like 5 a.m. for the football one.
Yeah.
It's like Dr. Haynie said, I just got to show up.
Sometimes that's half that. That's what leadership is about, just showing up.
Yeah. So do you have any advice for a veteran coming out of the service, either officer or enlisted?
World's your oyster. I think, again, sometimes we get so locked into, hey, this is what I did in the military, so I have to go do this in the civilian world, or, the reality is, I sort of look at that transition and hope people look at that transition as, okay, I have this sushi menu of things that I can go do because, the GI, things like the GI Bill, right? You don't, that the GI Bill is a reset opportunity, because it doesn't matter if you were infantry or an MP or a electronics technician. That GI Bill is a pivot opportunity to go do whatever it is you want, and don't let anybody talk you into, well, this is what you did in the military, so these are the 4 jobs that you're eligible for when you get out. I mean, the example I use all the time is, that there's a legitimate national shortage of truck drivers in the United States, and we get all the time at the Institute these companies, these big trucking companies calling, where are the veterans? People drove trucks in the military, but we can't find veterans to drive trucks for us. And you want to be polite, but you also want to, you're thinking, well, you know what? Just because somebody drove a truck in the military doesn't mean they want to drive a truck for the rest of their life. To your question, my advice is pursue your passion and hit the reset button if you want to hit the reset button.
Yeah, I didn't say it quite like that, but when I was transferred to community college, I was like, I don't know what resources Syracuse has, but I know there would be pretty good resources that I could take advantage of. And that's why part of the reason I came here. So I'm really glad I came here. There's so many opportunities. I came here, that's it. I want to be a chiropractor. And then now, still in the field of like physical therapy, but now I'm looking at law. And I do want to be in the healthcare for sure, but there's so many opportunities and just learning a lot on this campus.
Yep.
So one question I ask every guest is, what is your favorite quote and why?
Probably my so this changes over time. So somebody that tells you they're going to have one favorite quote for life is somebody who maybe doesn't read a whole lot, because but over the last couple of years, I had let's call it an opportunity to lead the COVID response here at Syracuse University when we went through COVID. And
no wonder your department is all rising. It's meetings every day.
But COVID reminded me, that experience managing COVID at Syracuse reminded me in very real, direct, everyday kind of ways. Back to this word I used before, empathy. It reminded me the value and the importance of empathy. And there's a Maya Angelou quote that I now think about a lot. It says, the quote goes like this. I might not get it perfect, but they won't remember what you said, but they will remember how you made them feel. And and that's one that I think about a lot in the context of trying to be empathetic in how I lead.
That's fantastic. I think that really shows the type of leader you are. I've heard veterans on this campus say they'll bleed for you. And I haven't heard, there's not too many leaders I've met in my whole life that I would do that for. And I heard multiple veterans on this campus say a lot of really nice things about you. And it really shows the way you not only said things, but you put your actions to your words.
Well, it's back to the other quote. Hey, sometimes it's just about showing up. I mean, that by itself Because that speaks to how it makes people feel. Just having you show up sometimes is enough.
Wow. Oh, well, I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to meet with me today. And I really, truly appreciate everything you've done on this campus for myself and all the student vendors and their families.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me, and I enjoyed it. It's good conversation.
Thank you.